Generative AI is here, and it has changed the rules of the game. Experts like Seth Godin and Robert McKee have been very clear. The authors who are going to make it in this business are those who are writing truly amazing, knock your socks off innovative stories. The bar is that high. AI will replace mediocre writers. But at some point, everybody is mediocre. So what do? You educate yourself. And the good news is that there's still time, but you've got to start leveling up right away. I'm Valerie Francis, and I've got a series of webinars to help you do just that. My specialty is helping authors like you put theory into practice. Understanding the tools of our trade and being able to apply them with precision is no longer an option. It's an absolute necessity. So go to valeriefrancis.ca/webinars for more information and sign up for the notifications. You can't afford not to. For our final archive episode of the summer, I've chosen Death on the Nile, a film we studied back in season 2. Now, I love murder mysteries and I love Agatha Christie, so it's no surprise that I chose this one. I had a lot of fun preparing this episode, and I discovered some really fascinating information about why audiences love Agatha Christie mysteries. And I think the lessons will be of particular interest to anyone writing a mystery, thriller, crime story, spy story, or any other genre that appeals to the logical left brain. With A Haunting in Venice coming out on September 15th, I thought it would be fun to revisit Kenneth Branagh's last outing as Hercule Poirot. And we'll be back next week with a brand new episode and a brand new season. I'll be studying character development, and Melanie will be studying world building. Be sure to check it out. We'll see you then.
If you want to write stories your readers will love, there are 3 things you need to do. Understand storytelling principles, see how other writers have applied those principles, and then use them in your own work. Here on the Story Nerd podcast, our goal is to demystify story theory. We'll help you with the first 2 steps so that you can get started with the third. I'm Melanie Hill, writer, editor and poet, and I have a passion for middle grade and young adult stories, spy stories, fairy tales and master detective novels.
And I'm Valerie Francis. I'm a writer and literary editor, and I focus on stories by, for, and about women.
On today's episode, Valerie pitched Death on the Nile so that we can study the hero's gift expressed. This 2022 film was directed by Kenneth Branagh from a screenplay by Michael Green and based on the book by Agatha Christie. Of course, there will be spoilers because we can't talk about the movie without talking about the movie. Now, Valerie and I are going to ask a favour, and we would really love it if you give our show a rating and review. For Apple Podcast listeners, you can do it right from your phone. Simply go to the show's landing page and scroll to the bottom. Leave us a rating and review. It's that simple. So Valerie, what have you got for us for the genre for this story?
Well, I think the genre is pretty obvious for this one this week. I have it as a crime murder mystery, master detective. But I think it's the secondary genre that's more interesting to talk about this week because there isn't one. Although Kenneth Branagh, God bless his heart, is trying his best to create one. Now, I don't think we've really talked about this whole concept of primary and secondary genres, so let me do it now. The primary genre is also called the global genre, and it's obviously the main genre for the story. In this case, it's a murder mystery, which is called an external genre because it's about what's happening in the physical world. These kinds of stories are also called plot-driven stories. There's also something called an internal genre, for example, a coming-of-age story. And it's called internal because it's about what's happening within the character. And these are character-driven stories. Often, stories will have both an internal and an external genre, with one of them being primary or the global genre, and the other one then, of course, being the secondary genre. But there are plenty of stories where the main character doesn't change at all, and Agatha Christie's books fall into this category. These stories have an external genre, but no internal genre. But like I said, Kenneth Branagh is trying his best to create an internal genre for Poirot. You'll also hear this technique referred to as adding depth to the character, or giving the character dimension, or maybe even revealing a character's backstory. From an actor's perspective, I get it. I totally get it. After all, it gives the actor more to do. They get to show off their talent and their ability and their range. And I'm guessing that these types of characters with an internal arc are more fun to play. We talked a lot about this on our episode about 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri. So if you haven't listened to that episode, go back and give it a listen. Now, that said, just because something can be done doesn't mean it should be done. David Suchet displayed immense talent in his portrayal of Poirot, and he did it by sticking to what Agatha Christie wrote in her books. His goal wasn't to show off his talent. His goal was to tell the story. This 2022 version feels like it's about Kenneth Branagh's ego. I'm sorry to say that, but it's true. Ken's a big boy. He can handle it. It feels like it's about Kenneth Branagh, not about the story. It's about showing off what he can do. That's what it feels like to me. Now, I do have a lot more to say about this, but before I go on, Melanie, what is your take on the genre?
So you've got no argument from me about the global genre. And like you, I find the attempt at the secondary genre in this version of Death on the Nile interesting. And I didn't like it. Didn't like it at all. However, in the 2018 production of ABC Murders, where Poirot is played by John Malkovich, this also added some interesting backstory to the character. And some of the usual conventions within the Poirot murder mysteries were broken. But I do think overall it was a far more successful interpretation of Poirot and compared to what we see in this particular version. I would also have to say that David Suchet is Poirot for me. John Malkovich version would have to be a second, and then any other version probably comes somewhere way down on the list for me in terms of who I see Poirot as, or who I think represents him the best on screen. So both recent versions stray from the backstory that Agatha Christie gave Poirot, which is very interesting. So that's the John Malkovich version as well as Kenneth Branagh's. And I don't think Agatha Christie ever let the backstory interfere with the story that she was telling. And I like that approach, and I think it works well in the Master Detective novel. Poirot's consistency is a strength in the storytelling because it keeps the focus on the ensemble cast. Their foibles and humanity are front and centre of the murder mysteries, as well as the investigation into human nature. And there's no competition between the cast and then Poirot's inner turmoil, which I think is very important and something that we have come to love about Poirot in particular. I also thought there was something off with this movie. However, after watching the 2004 version with David Suchet and listening to the audiobook, Kenneth Branagh's version sticks to the timing and the plot of Agatha Christie's stories very generally. There are some changes that Kenneth Branagh makes that are not true to the original, but I do think that the problem with the story stems from the original version that Agatha Christie wrote. Now, I've read some of the comments down below, Valerie, and I think you might disagree with me, but do you think any versions of Death on the Nile work?
Well, first of all, it's best that I do not comment on the John Malkovich interpretation. I didn't see that part because honestly, I couldn't even get through the trailer. I just hated it. I didn't get a chance to watch the 1978 version this week, unfortunately, although it's on my list, but I have to get caught up on Better Call Saul first because I'm terrified someone's going to spoil it. But yes, David Suchet is Poirot for me too. He is Poirot. He has totally embodied that character. Now, in saying that, I'm not against other actors wanting to give their interpretations of the character or other writers wanting to take a stab at adapting Christie's stories for the screen. That's natural. It's normal. That's art. That's what we do. But this version of the story does not work. And all week I've been trying to put my finger on the reason why. I'm not sure if I've done it, but I do have a theory. Surprise, surprise. First, I think, honestly, that there isn't just one reason. I think there are several reasons. And this might be, as good a time as any to explain why I think Kenneth Branagh has made Agatha Christie roll over in her grave, the poor woman. And by the way, the reason I'm going to take the time to talk about this right now is because one of our StoryGrid colleagues asked for our opinion on it. She doesn't think it works, and she wanted our take. So here it goes. I give my opinion freely even when it isn't asked for, but since it's been asked for, here I go. So visually, yes, this is a stunning film, and boy, oh boy, Kenneth Branagh was going to make sure he got his money's worth out of that underwater camera he rented. The casting is, it's odd, I think, but the music is excellent. And the way the shots are set up, they're a feast for the eyes. However, all of these things are outside the writer's control. So I'm setting them all aside and I'm focusing on the storytelling here. From a writing perspective, I think Kenneth Branagh has monkeyed around with this story so much that he's lost the essence of both Poirot and the Agatha Christie murder mystery. How? Well, here are just a couple of ways. First, we are waiting too long for the murder. I think Agatha Christie makes this work in the novel. Now, I haven't done an in-depth analysis of this, and honestly, it's not my favorite book of hers, but it is part of the canon for a reason. The murder happens late in the novel, but it's even later in the film versions. Agatha Christie puts it at about 37%, and I'm using the ebook version here to calculate that, so it's an estimate, but it's at about 37%, so that means there's still 63% of the story left for the whole puzzle solving thing. And that's what we're here for, right? Branagh puts it at 55% in, which is a whole whopping hour and 5 minutes into the movie. This is a problem. Since the discovery of the dead body is the inciting incident for a murder mystery, and Branagh puts it in the second half of the movie, audiences have to sit through more than an hour of screen time with nothing really happening, and it is so boring. Agatha Christie still had to hold her audience's attention for a really long time, though. Now, how did she do this? Well, this brings me to my second point, and that is, in Branagh's version, the cast, or the list of suspects, is too small. Even though Christie delays the murder, the story time leading up to the murder is doing really important work. It's introducing the possible suspects and giving them all a motive. But far more importantly, and stay with me here, Agatha Christie is using the time to control the reader through her words. In preparation for this episode, I watched an ITV documentary all about the science of Agatha Christie novels. Not the science behind the various forms of murder, like the poisons and whatnot, but the science behind her writing and why so many people love her work. Now, in case you're not aware of it, Agatha Christie is the most popular novelist of all time. Her sales are third behind the Bible and Shakespeare. So, in this documentary, they interviewed a specialist in neuro-linguistic programming. And basically, what he said is that our conscious minds can only concentrate on between 5 and 9 things at any given time. We can't track more than 9 things. So, when we're presented with more than 9, we go into a hypnotic trance. So when we have Agatha Christie introducing us to 9 characters and 9 plot lines. She's overloading our minds and putting us into a trance. That means we are feeling the book. We're experiencing it and getting lost in it. We're not just thinking about it. And get this, because feelings are much stronger than thoughts, readers associate the feeling they get with Agatha Christie's name and her novels. So when we finish one Agatha Christie book, we want that feeling again. So we go back for another Agatha Christie novel. Like, how cool is this? Seriously, this is cool. So how does that apply here to Kenneth Branagh's version, versus Agatha Christie's novel? Well, the Branagh version does have 12 characters, but Agatha Christie's novel has 35. 35 characters. Christie's characters make more sense. They do. The motives for wanting Lynette dead make more sense, and the whole plot is far more intricate. Christie is stuffing more story into a shorter space. It is so much harder to figure out whodunit in the book because we have no idea what to track because we don't even know who the victim is. Even though Branagh has more than this magical number of 9, the way the plot lines are portrayed makes it very easy to know who the murderers are. Simon and Jackie are so explicit, so quickly, that Simon's marriage to Lynette 6 weeks later, it just doesn't make any sense. It does not ring true. It's weird. It sticks out like a sore thumb. Immediately, we know it's either Simon or Jackie or both of them. And none of the other plot lines are strong enough to convince us that it could be anybody else other than them. Now, we don't know how they pull it off, but we know it's them. I totally understand that novelists do not have to deal with a budget, and filmmakers do. So I understand why they couldn't have a cast of 35. I mean, try watching that film. 12 is still pretty big for a movie. But in order for this particular storyline to work, we need the 35. What's more, a large cast of characters who are all viable suspects is a convention of an Agatha Christie murder mystery, and genre conventions are critical. Okay, on to my next point. In the Branagh film, there's a lot of wasted time, which forces Branagh to tell rather than show. The clues are given quite boldly. They're not subtle. Therefore, they're easy for us to spot. For example, when Lynette tells Poirot that she doesn't feel safe on the boat, her statement is, "I don't feel safe with any of them." And it, like, she comes right out and says it. And the comment comes out of nowhere. By contrast, Agatha Christie weaves clues and red herrings seamlessly into characters' conversations. We don't notice them. And once the murder happens, we struggle to remember all the details. So what Agatha Christie is doing is putting her readers on the back foot, and she is daring us to try and catch up with her. And the movie doesn't do that. The final point I will make, and this is by far the most grievous in my opinion, is that Kenneth Branagh's mustache is all wrong. It's all wrong. Branagh has made Poirot look like Colonel Sanders, and I'm sorry, that is unforgivable. It is completely distracting. And in the end, he shaves it off like, oh my God, that is so stupid. And the whole scar thing makes no sense. If Poirot is growing facial hair to hide the scar, he'd need a full beard. His injury at the beginning of the film is most of the right side of his face. And if you think I'm sort of, being nitpicky here, I'm not, because it's very clear that the whole side of his face is damaged. Yet, when we see him many years later, he's got this gigantic mustache, but there's no scarring on his cheek where there should be. Immediately we notice it, and I thought, well, I'm so confused. Where's the scar? Did he have the scar? Did he not scar? And I was distracted from the storytelling by trying to work out what's going on with the scar. And then we're thrown into a scene with Simon and Jackie practically having sex on a dance floor. And I'm like, where have I landed? This is not an Agatha Christie story. What the heck is going on? Anyway, that's all I have to say about that right now. Melanie, do you have anything to say?
So I just, I agree with you, especially about the mustache. But I will say the thing that threw me about that is I don't think scar tissue grows hair. So that's the bit that kept me going, what is going on with this in terms of, like, I do understand wanting to hide scars and imperfections with facial hair, but like you said, the size of the injury and the scar tissue that he would have I would have thought would prevent him from growing a mustache as fine and as bushy as the one worn in this version of the movie. So that really distracted me. Maybe we should do a special podcast episode on Poirot's mustache and the different versions. But that really distracted me as well. But but on a more serious note, I don't think, so I'm going to disagree a little bit with you about the impact the murder has on all of the motives of the characters. I don't think that this worked for an Agatha Christie movie, and I'll explain why when I get to it. But it's interesting that you thought that it did, and whereas I thought that didn't, because and you made the point that by the time you actually get to the murder, you don't even remember what it is that they said, and I think that's a failure of the story as a whole. But this is good, like finding different things out about this particular story. So, but I'm keen, it is a Poirot movie, so I'm keen to hear what you think of this version of the hero's gift expressed. So over to you.
You think that Agatha Christie's version of the story doesn't work?
No, I don't. I don't think it works.
Them's fighting words. Okay. All right.
Again, oh my God.
All right. Why don't I just continue with the hero's gift expressed, or we'll never get out of this episode. I like that. People will stop listening. All right. Let me continue. The hero's gift expressed. All right. So out of the gate, we do see Poirot's gift at the 3-minute mark when he tells his captain that they need to attack right away. Yes, it's his gift for sure, but it is not applied to crime solving. Technically, it works. I mean, he's ticking a box. Great. But for me anyway, I found it really disappointing because I'm here for a crime story, not a war story. Nothing wrong with war stories, but that's not what I ordered. And I can't remember how Agatha Christie did it in the book, and I forgot to look it up and forgot till just the second. All right, so chances are the audience already knows what Poirot's gift is. I mean, this character is 102 years old. We all know that his gift is his little gray cells, and Poirot knows it's a gift. He is very proud of this gift, and he keeps telling us about it. That said, there are always people discovering this character. I love it. And they're discovering Agatha Christie's books as well, which is wonderful. It could very well be true that Branagh's films are someone's first introduction to Poirot. Now, from that perspective, I'm so happy that movies are still being made of her books. I really am. But unfortunately, they're not getting Christie's Poirot. I think they're being shortchanged here. Branagh's version is grittier and sillier. And he even seems to have a dash of Columbo in him, and it's bizarre. It's just bizarre. Okay, to get back to the gift. I have no idea why Branagh would choose to show us Poirot's gift in such a melodramatic way. Melodrama doesn't fit into the Poirot world. Now, yes, Branagh is trying to develop a backstory for the character, but the audience hasn't signed up for bombs on a battlefield. We're here to see the little gray cells in action. Maybe Branagh is trying to reboot the character or make him more relevant to a 21st century audience, but whatever the reason, I think he's lost the essence of Poirot. And this version of Death on the Nile has lost the essence of an Agatha Christie mystery. The ITV version with David Suchet is a much better representation of the original novel. Alrighty, In past episodes, I've said that evidence of the gift tends to be sprinkled throughout the story, and it is here too, but not very effectively. Now, stick with me here. I've got a lot of timings, and this is a bit of a laundry list, and I've skipped this in past episodes, but I think it's really important to go through it here so that you understand what I'm talking about and why I think it's not working effectively in this version of the story. So at 19 minutes in, Book tells his mother to meet the greatest detective alive, and Poirot agrees that this is correct. So it isn't a demonstration of his gift, it's simply a statement of it, and this happens a number of times throughout the film. At 38 minutes in, Poirot knows that Lynette has invited him on the boat for, quote, reasons other than the fun. So this is a bit of detection work that he's done. 42 minutes in, Poirot brags about himself again. He says, to be what I am, the little gray cells pampered, indulged, given all the oxygen in my blood and minutes on my clock. Poirot's dialogue is weird in this movie. I won't go into it, but just listen to it. Just listen. Actually, turn the captions on when you're watching the movie. His dialogue is weird. So Poirot says that compared to him, other detectives are only fine. And then he teases Book about trying to keep a secret from him because he is the great Poirot. 52 minutes in, this is when the boulder drops on Lynette and Simon and they narrowly escape. Now, Poirot doesn't say anything here, but from the acting, I can tell that, Poirot's little gray cells are starting to kick in here. Why? Because they have something to kick in about, finally. At 56 minutes in, Poirot is crying. And this is when he's remembering his first love. Now, this is not a Poirot trait. And it actually goes against his gift. So what are the little gray cells all about? That's his logic. It's his power of deduction. It's all left brain stuff. Now, he's not an automaton. He's a man with feelings and emotions. But in a professional setting, they do not show. Every now and again, you get a flash of anger or a flash of frustration. But we don't see Poirot crying. Like, what the hell? Like, right? And it's actually devaluing his gift. Because if his gift is rational thought and with a couple of drinks in him, he starts to cry, I don't know, that threw me off. It was a close-up moment for Kenneth Branagh's ability to cry on cue, and it took me right out of the film. At an hour and 5 minutes in, this is when Poirot finally begins his investigation. Alleluia. This is when we really start to see evidence of his gift, but unfortunately, there's not a lot of time left in the movie. So right away, we have Poirot bragging about himself again. At an hour and 16 minutes, he says, I am Hercule Poirot. I do not need to be told. It's really hard to do it without the accent. I have eyes and they see, and a brain and it thinks. Yes, he has demonstrated his gift by deducing what is in the legal papers. But then he tells us how smart he is just for good measure because, the audience hasn't had much of an opportunity to see it for themselves. Now, sidebar here. The problem with all of these self-aggrandizing statements is that they have the opposite effect. Sure, Poirot is vain, yep, and he is confident. His track record for solving crimes is evidence of what he can do. But it's far more effective when other characters talk about his talent. Christie has Poirot pat himself on the back in like a bunch of books, maybe all of them, I don't know. But it's done sparingly within a novel and strategically. Not so in the Branagh version. Now, let's apply this to real life. When you meet someone who constantly brags about how smart they are, do you honestly think they're smart? Or do you think they're overcompensating and that they're some kind of a show-off? Like, does this lend credibility to that person in your estimation? Or does it erode the credibility? It's probably the latter, right? Because if you really are the smartest person in the room, everybody knows it. You do not have to declare it. All right, back to Poirot's gift. At an hour and 26 minutes in, now this is a great example of Poirot as Columbo. He's questioning Salome about her hat. And having questioned both her and Rosalie, he turns to leave and then immediately turns back and he says, "There was one final question. It is a curiosity of mine. Your hat in the turban style. As many times as I have seen you, you have always worn one like it, but it is out of fashion, no? If you would indulge me, please, to remove it." And Salome says, he's driving at an answer he already knows. This is classic Columbo. He always turns to leave and then turns back and goes, one more thing. Right? And we already know, Columbo already knows the answer to whatever question it is he's about to ask. I love Columbo. He's so good. Okay, an hour and 28 minutes in. I'm almost done with my list. Stay with me here. At an hour and 28 minutes in, we learn that Poirot has a second secret case that he's been investigating. We see the famous Poirot denouement, where he reveals his findings. But you know what? It's totally meaningless to us because we never knew he was investigating the case in the first place. It's a demonstration of his gift, to be sure, but it doesn't land with the audience because we're not invested in it. Who cares? I don't care if Rosalie's a good match for Book. I don't care about these two characters at all. It's also a terrific example of telling, not showing. Rosalie highlights Poirot's character for the audience. Why? Because we don't have enough time to get a chance to see what he can do and come to that opinion on our own. And for those who know the character from the novels, Rosalie's assessment of him makes us dislike Rosalie because she's completely misunderstanding who this man is. And I think that's really too bad. I really do. Even more than that, this is not the kind of case that Poirot would have taken on. And if you don't know that from the Agatha Christie books, you know it from this movie. Why? Because we already saw him say no to this. Poirot refused a similar case earlier in the movie. Lynette and Simon asked him to deal with Jackie, but he refuses because Jackie has committed no crime. He doesn't get involved in marital or relationship affairs. He's not a private investigator. He is the great Poirot. Are you kidding me? This is nuts. Well, Rosalie hasn't committed a crime either. So why would Poirot accept Euphemia's request to investigate her? It's another relationship matter. Like it's not adding up here. At an hour and 33 minutes in, we see Poirot reenacting Louise's attack. And okay, so this is an expression of his gift. Gold star. At an hour and 35 minutes in, Poirot's emotional again. He's not logical. This is another devaluation of his gift. He tells Simon that he's allowed affection to color the clarity of my thoughts in your investigation. I must ask you to remain as witness to this interview. Really? Really? The great Poirot, with his little gray cells, has allowed affection to color the clarity of his thoughts? And it's not a strong affection like love or sex that has allowed him to get distracted. It's his buddy, Book. Like, I don't understand. These are all places where the audience is taken out of the story and are very aware that they're watching a movie and watching actors moving around on a stage. At an hour and 44 minutes in, again, Poirot is talking about his own intelligence. Now, Poirot would never, ever in a million years say this. Now, it might be true, but he's not that bold. He doesn't come out and say these things. He doesn't make these kinds of proclamations. He just does his job and lets his actions do the talking. So here's what Poirot says. Miss Otterbourne is right. I love to talk. An audience. I am vain, you see. I love people to hear me bring the solution to a crime and say, see how clever Hercule Poirot is? I don't know. If he says that in a book, can you contact me on Twitter or Instagram at Valerie_Francis and just point out where that is said? Because I don't know all of the books off by heart, but that just doesn't seem to ring true. And finally, at an hour and 51 minutes in, Poirot is crying again. And this is not Poirot. It's too much emotion. It's not enough little gray cells, and it's not enough logic. And that, after all, is his gift. So, yeah, we are hinted at. The gift is hinted at, but I have to give him a fail on the Hero's Gift Express for this one. Okay, Melanie, what do you think?
So, well, I think this is interesting, right? Because this is the first time we've come up about some with a character that erodes their own gift. So it's a great example of what not to do when you're thinking about the gift and how not to contradict yourself and let the gift play out. But they're really good points. I hadn't picked up on some of those as I was watching it this week. All right, so the forces of antagonism. So this week, I think we were presented with a genre crime which has had a massive impact on the forces of antagonism, and it was our job to investigate. So I'm on theme. Right, so I read the original story, watched the 2004 movie, as well as the 2022 version. And I can say that this was no mean feat to do this in a week. And it's not something that I'll be sustaining when we have a movie based on a book again, because it took a lot of time and a lot of cramming of stuff. But it was, for this particular example, I think it was worth it, especially when you have multiple versions of the same story. As mentioned, I thought this year's Murder on the Nile was a problem movie. But I thought now, having read and done all that research, that the problem is bigger than that. It's a problem story, full stop. And the 2004 version suffers as well because of the late murder, and I believe that the original story does too. So this is a murder mystery. So we expect a death. And until that death occurs, like Valerie said, we're waiting. And not knowing who's going to die until the midpoint of that story doesn't create enough suspense in Death on the Nile. The apparent drama surrounding the love triangle between Jackie, Simon and Lynette is not enough to hold our interest when we want a murder investigation. There is a little drama in the first half of the story until the murder takes place. And in my view, it's nothing more than posh English guests and their gripes. The drama has nothing to do with why we read a Poirot story. It was petty and not a convincing way to provide background about the ensemble cast, which would normally expand the pool of suspects, no matter what the story was. The biggest problem with a middle-of-the-story murder, from a forces of antagonism perspective, is that there is no murder to link the ensemble or to drive Poirot to discover how they are connected. He doesn't have to bring a murderer to justice. Now, it seems like an obvious thing to say that the person who committed the crime is the primary antagonist in a crime story. In the Agatha Christie stories, the crime is a murder, so it's the murderer who is evading capture. But the cast also provide the sleuth with a puzzle to solve by providing alternate motives, red herrings and cuttlefish. So what does a master detective do if there's no murder? Well, not much. And this is a big problem. And it's a big problem because there isn't a force of antagonism until the murder occurs. There is an interesting device, I think, that Agatha Christie could have been playing with when she was writing Death on the Nile. And it's when the antagonist states the crime before it happens, then the crime happens in exactly the same way as it's described. This prompts an automatic question by the suspected character of, why would I tell you, then incriminate myself? And therefore it becomes a circular argument, and it's a very light alibi for why the character would not have committed a crime. And I think it's overused, to be very honest. And even when it's used, it doesn't make much sense in other stories that I've seen use it. So she could have been playing with that. I'll put that out there as an idea. But I'm not sure if it worked very well. Well, it didn't work very well. In the book, Jackie mentions how she wishes she could put her gun to Lynette's head and slowly pull the trigger. And Poirot comes back to this a few times after the murder. And I think from memory, in the most recent version, this setup is used as well. Yes, there is a big premeditated motive placed right in front of our face. We have a choice to believe it or not. and we could dismiss it for a red herring if the rest of the ensemble were serious contenders for the murder. Do we think that it could have been any of the ensemble at any point? I don't think so. The way this story is set up is a waste of precious time, and Valerie mentioned this as well. We don't know who the victim is going to be, and therefore it kind of makes the story a little bit pointless. And it's the victim who all the information that we are given through the rest of the story, that information must relate to that victim. So even when Poirot goes about unpacking all the relationships and linking events, it's frustrating in Death on the Nile because we have no sense of the red herrings or how anything relates to Lynette's eventual murder. And I'm talking about the beginning of the story before the murder occurs. Nor do we see Poirot struggle through an investigation. And as Valerie mentioned, there are some interesting character changes and different versions of characters and new characters that pop up in Sir Ken's adaptation. But there was one that really stood out for me, and I thought it was quite distracting. It was actually Dr. Whittlesham. So he appears very early in the novel, but then disappears with a broken heart. And in the 2022 version, the doctor is on the boat and he's played by Russell Brand, who has never said so little in all his life. I don't know how they stopped him from talking. But anyway, to be honest, the ensemble doesn't make much of a difference, in my opinion, on Death of the Nile because the story is not well executed. It all comes back, and this all comes back to when the crime happens and what our expectations are. Poirot's investigation is short, and I didn't suspect any of the ensemble cast at all. And I was pretty sure it was going to be Simon and or Jackie right from the start of the movie. And in fact, my 11 and 15-year-olds who watched the movie with me were of the same opinion, and they have never seen an Agatha Christie story before. So this was their introduction to the great Hercule Poirot. And I think this is a really big sign. If they didn't pick, or if they picked up on who it was going to be in their first viewing, it really meant that the movie was not up to the usual standard. And it's thanks, though, to stories like Death on the Nile because we can learn about what doesn't work. And Agatha Christie was an innovator of the murder mystery story, and sometimes when we innovate, it doesn't work, but it is necessary. The forces of antagonism lessons from Death on the Nile are: an investigator needs a crime, and the crime is a reference point for all the other clues, red herrings, and cuttlefish. The crime also gives the ensemble cast context. The ensemble should all appear to have a motive. Their stories, when uncovered through the course of the investigation or revealed during the denouement, make sense because of the connection to the victim and the murder. For the first half of Death on the Nile in the book and in the 2004 version, we have no idea why these people all happen to be in Cairo or how they were selected to travel on the Karnak together. And I will say, I think this is where Sir Ken does improve on the original story. He gives the ensemble a reason to be together, and they are mostly acquaintances brought together because of Simon and Lynette's marriage. But that was the one redeeming thing I could find from a forces of antagonism perspective. And again, I think we can learn a lot from an author like Agatha Christie because her body of work is so large. And there are some of her stories that work better than others. And I don't think, as I've mentioned, that this one works. So all you crime writers out there, Death on the Nile is a cautionary tale about genre crime. You must have a crime early in your story because if you don't, then the investigator is wasting their time fluffing about. And the information presented before the murder doesn't have any context. The crime anchors your story. It provides the protagonist with a force of antagonism. It allows them to struggle with the obstacles and ultimately provides the reader with a sense of satisfaction when the crime is solved. Now, this is not the only story by a well-regarded author who's credited with establishing the genre of a story that doesn't work. So I don't know if any of you have read A Study in Scarlet, which is the first Sherlock Holmes story by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. And if you do read it, or you have read it, it won't surprise me if you find that it doesn't work, because 1/4 of the story is dedicated to the antagonist's backstory. So it doesn't work, and it only bears some, and the reason it doesn't work, I should say, is because it only bears some relevance to Sherlock Holmes solving the crime. So it's good to go back and see that sometimes the innovation is not quite hitting the mark. But again, I think it's very necessary. So when you don't like a story or you think there's something wrong, trust your spidey senses and start detecting. If you have read some other classics in this genre that you don't think work, then please let me know on Twitter or Instagram. I would really like to have a look at them and see if I can unpick why it is. I like being a detective, so a story detective. So I like to see if I can work out why these things don't work. So please let me know. So Valerie, what do you think? Do you think, I know these were fighting words, but have I put together a reasonable case as to why I actually think that the novel version of this story doesn't work either?
Okay, now I know what you're talking about when you said you don't think it works. And I take it back. They're not fighting words. I think that's the only time I've ever taken anything back. I understand what you mean.
That's a win for me.
I actually agree with you. My biggest recommendation is have the crime early. It doesn't have to be the very first scene of the book, although it could be, but you want to have it in there early because that's the inciting incident of the whole story, and your reader is there because they want a literary puzzle to sort out. So you have to give it to them. Now, Agatha Christie is the queen. So what she's doing in the setup, like up to that 37%, it's still hard to stay with her. I'm with you on that. And the reason we stay with her is because it's Agatha Christie and we have faith that she's going to pay this thing off. So unless you have Agatha Christie's reputation, you might want to put the murder up front and everything that Melanie just said. Okay. All right. Action steps. Here's what I want you to do this week. I want you to think about your main character and the gift you've given her, and then look through your manuscript to see if at any time she's behaving in a way that devalues her gift.
Right, that wraps it up for this week. Join us next week when we discuss the movie Booksmart. To support the show, please leave us a rating and review and tell your writer friends about us. For even more information about putting story theory into practice, subscribe to Valerie's Inner Circle by visiting valeriefrancis.ca/innercircle and follow her on Twitter and Instagram at Valerie_Francis. If you'd like to find more out about me, visit melaniehill.com.au or find me on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram at Melanie Hill Author. And remember, story theory doesn't have to be difficult. It's a tool to help you write more, not less. So take one step at a time and have fun.